thought I was clearing out my father's garage. I was wrong. I was sorting through every project he ever finished, every winter he got us through, every Saturday morning he spent under a hood while the rest of the world slept in, and every version of him I was not ready to let go of. I walked in with trash bags, a folding table, and a plan to be efficient about it. 3 hours later, I was sitting on an overturned 5-gallon bucket, crying over a rusted tape measure, because it turns out grief does not care how organized your plan is. It hides inside the smallest tools, and it waits for exactly the moment you think you have it under control. So if you are clearing out a parent's workshop right now, or sorting through a garage, an attic, a storage unit, anything that used to belong to someone you loved, go easy on yourself today. This kind of work is never just physical labor. It asks you questions you did not know you had been avoiding for years. Today, I am walking you through the 11 things cleaning out my father's garage taught me about memory, guilt, grief, and what I do not want to leave behind for my own son someday. And number 1 is something I found in the very back corner, behind a stack of paint cans nobody had touched in a decade, and it is the thing that finally made me sit down on that bucket and stop pretending I was fine. Stay with me for that one, because I promise you it is worth the wait. 11. The tools he reached for every single day told the truth about him, not the ones locked away in a case, waiting for a project that never came. I walked in expecting to find the expensive stuff first, and honestly, I was a little excited about it. A chrome socket set still sitting in its foam insert, unused. A cordless drill still wrapped in the plastic from a birthday nobody quite remembers anymore. I figured those would be the pieces that meant the most. But the thing that actually undid me was hanging on a bent nail by the side door. A plain claw hammer, nothing special about it, the kind you could buy at any hardware store for $20. Except the handle was worn down smooth and dark, shaped almost perfectly to the curve of one man's grip after 40 years of use. That hammer had zero resale value. If it showed up at an estate sale, nobody would even pick it up to look closer. But it had absorbed more of my father's actual, real, everyday life than that entire untouched chrome set combined, because that hammer knew his hands. It was there for the treehouse, for the fence, for 100 small repairs nobody ever thanked him for. Before that day, I genuinely believed the important tools were the ones that looked expensive and stayed pristine. Now I understand that the important ones are usually the plainest looking, because they were used constantly, not saved for some future moment that kept getting pushed back. 10. His handwriting on a torn scrap of cardboard felt like hearing his voice fill the room again, and I was not prepared for that at all. I found it taped to the inside of a cabinet door, half hidden behind a coil of extension cord. A torque spec, written in pencil, faded and smudged from years of humidity, and right underneath it, in the same shaky capital letters, a note that just said, "Don't trust the gauge, go by feel." A printed manual would never have hit me the way that scrap of cardboard did. His handwriting did that. The rushed capital letters that never quite lined up, the number he crossed out and corrected, the stubborn little instruction that basically argued with the manufacturer's own manual. I kept that piece of cardboard, not because the information is useful to me now. Honestly, I do not even own that kind of engine, but because it was proof his hands had been right there, in that exact spot, disagreeing with a machine in his own particular hard-headed way. Some inheritances are not the object. They are the tiny argument frozen inside it. 9. The drawer full of "might need it someday" turned out to be a drawer full of not having enough, once, a long time ago. He kept bent nails he had carefully straightened back out, stripped screws saved in an old coffee can, offcuts of wood too small for any project I could imagine, tucked into a shoebox like they were something valuable. At first, I nearly laughed out loud standing there. Then I stopped laughing completely, because I finally understood what I was actually looking at. That was not clutter. That was the memory of a man who had watched his own father stretch every last scrap of material, because there was never a guarantee of an easy next trip to the store, or the money to make that trip even if the store was open. I kept a handful of things from that drawer that were genuinely still useful. I did not keep the whole drawer, and I had to be honest with myself about why. I do not have to inherit every fear about scarcity that shaped him, even if I loved him, and I do not have to mistake that inherited fear for love itself, just because it came from someone I miss. 8. A shoebox of old receipts showed me a kind of invisible work that nobody around here ever thought to thank him for. Oil changes for a widow 2 streets over. A brake job done on a Sunday for practically nothing. A transmission he rebuilt in a single weekend for a neighbor who flat out could not afford a real shop. Nobody frames a stack of grease-stained receipts. Nobody calls that a legacy in any official sense. But sitting there on the concrete floor of his garage, those slips of paper showed me the quiet, mostly unpaid labor that had genuinely held our little corner of the neighborhood together for decades, without a single person ever once calling it a job or a sacrifice or anything at all. 7. Some things in that garage were memories. Other things were assignments in disguise, and learning to tell the difference was harder than I expected. I held on to his old work truck keys for a long time that afternoon, just turning them over in my hand. At first, I genuinely thought I should keep the truck itself, running or not, parked permanently in my own driveway like some kind of shrine. But then it hit me what I actually wanted, and it was not the truck at all. I wanted permission to not become the guy who quietly fixes everyone else's problems on his weekends, the way he did for 30 years, without anyone ever once asking if he actually wanted to. A memory says, remember me. An assignment says, become me, whether it means to or not. And at 52 years old, I am finally learning that I do not have to become every single man who came before me in my own family, even the ones I loved without question, even the ones I still miss every single day. 6. One single tool, it turns out, can carry just as much weight as an entire toolbox full of them. There was a complete mechanics set sitting in the corner, heavy professional grade, honestly more tool than I would ever use in my own modest 2-car garage in 100 years. But the small cheap flathead screwdriver with the handle wrapped in electrical tape, the one that clearly lived in his shirt pocket for something like 30 straight years, that was the one that actually mattered. I kept that screwdriver. I let the entire matching set go to someone who could really put it to use. If this kind of honest, no-nonsense reflection on what we inherit is useful to you, take a second and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps me keep making these. Next video, I am walking through the tools I actually still use in my own garage today, plus the ones I finally admitted, out loud, on camera, I am never going to touch again. 5. Guilt, I learned the hard way, is not a valid storage system, no matter how much space you clear for it. I packed up his old table saw, then unpacked it, then packed it up again, 3 separate times over 2 different weekends. It is a genuinely good machine. Expensive when he bought it. It was his, for real, for years. But I already knew the plain truth the whole time. I do not have the garage space for it, and frankly, I am not the woodworker he was, not even close. I was not actually keeping a table saw in those boxes. I was keeping guilt, dressed up as sentiment, and guilt is a pretty poor reason to give something a permanent spot in your life. I ended up selling it to a guy who builds custom cabinets for a living, and something genuinely shifted in me after that. A good tool is honored more by being used every week than by sitting under a drop cloth out of pure obligation. 4. You cannot store grief inside a cardboard box, not even a carefully labeled one, no matter how hard you try. At one point that afternoon, I taped shut a box marked keep, even though I knew, even as I was sealing the tape down, that I was probably never going to open it again. I could not quite bring myself to write donate on the side instead. Grief is patient like that. It waits for you up in the rafters. It waits behind the stacked paint cans. It waits quietly inside a box you labeled keep only because your chest was too tight that day to make any real decision at all. So I made a separate pile instead, and I labeled it unsure. Not forever, just honest about where I actually was that day. 3. You cannot keep an entire season of a man's life alive by keeping every single object that came out of it. That garage taught me something genuinely hard to accept. A whole life does not live equally inside every item connected to it. Some things carry real love. Some things carry pure habit. Some things, if we are being completely honest, carry nothing at all except rust and dust and 40 years of quiet neglect. Once I finally accepted that, I stopped asking myself what would make me feel the least guilty walking away, and I started asking what would actually honor him best, which turned out to be a completely different question with a completely different answer. 2. Some things in that garage were true inheritance. Other things were just weight I had been agreeing to carry without ever questioning it. By the end of that day, I kept the hammer, the screwdriver, that scrap of cardboard with his handwriting still visible on it, and one flannel shirt still hanging on a hook by the side door like he might walk back in and grab it any minute. That was enough to genuinely recognize him by. Not everything he ever owned, just enough. 1. And here, finally, is the thing that actually broke me. Behind that stack of paint cans I mentioned, pushed all the way into the darkest back corner where I almost did not bother looking, I found a small wooden toolbox, hand-built, clumsy, uneven joints, obviously the work of a kid who had no real idea what he was doing yet. My own initials were carved into the side, badly, crooked, clearly done with a pocket knife I absolutely was not supposed to have at 11 years old. He never once said a single word to me about it, not once in 40 years. He just kept it. Quietly in the back of his garage for 4 decades, he kept the very first thing his son ever built, badly, with shaking hands and a stolen pocket knife, and he never once mentioned it out loud to me. I sat down right there on that overturned bucket, and I finally let myself actually cry, not out of guilt this time, but out of something closer to pure gratitude. A garage, I learned that day, is not just where a man kept his tools organized on the wall. It is where he quietly kept the people he loved most, tucked away in the corners without ever once needing to say any of it out loud. So, what is the one object that was hardest for you to let go of, whether it was a parent, a grandparent, or anyone else who mattered? Tell me down in the comments. I genuinely read every single one of them, and I know this particular topic brings up real stories for a lot of you watching right now. Next time, I am taking everything this garage taught me and bringing it straight into my own workshop, showing you exactly what I decided to keep, what I finally let go of, and how I have set things up now so that my own son will not need a dumpster and 3 trash bags someday just to find out that I loved him too. Until then, go easy on whatever you happen to be carrying right now. Some of it is heavier than it looks from the outside, and you do not have to put all of it down at once.